Hello, everyone. I'm Aki Nakanishi. Aki is the curator of culture, art, and education at Poland Japanese Garden here. Again, welcome to Poland Japanese Garden's first ever fireside chat on Zoom. Oh my God, we have been waiting for this day for too long, actually. We've been doing a number of virtual programs on social platforms like Facebook and Instagram, YouTube as well, since the pandemic hit us all. But as we are also getting more and more kind of immersed in this virtual world of exploring new ideas and looking deeper into programs to gain more insight, we thought it was time to really up the game and really try to serve your interest and intellectual needs in a much more engaging kind of way. Hence this, now everyone's kind of used to it, but Zoom webinar session. I hope this new platform and this new interface are not too foreign to you. We are certainly doing this together, actually. We are very much on a steep learning curve at the moment, trying to get the gist of this, and we are definitely trying to get this right first time around, but we would definitely appreciate any kind of feedback. First and foremost, your patience listening into the conversation that's to follow very shortly. As we try to navigate this kind of uncharted virtual territory actually. Today, this is an informal chat, quite literally. Well, this is a fireside chat, but I'm joining from a kitchen. So this could be called a kitchen side chat, I guess. But we are today just having an informal chat called the Wondrous World of Japanese Pottery. Since I moved here from Tokyo 2.5 years ago, one thing that really stood out and surprised me is the amount of local interest and enthusiasm for the ceramic art, not just Japanese or American, but from all over the world. Probably due to the great number of potters, studios, and active associations like the Oregon Potters Association that we love, there seems to be kind of disproportionately large community of pottery enthusiasts per capita here in the Pacific Northwest, compared to some of the places that I've been to in Japan, actually. So it's very refreshing, talking to many of our visitors who come to us, who come to see our current exhibitions of Japanese pottery up at the garden, talking to them about their personal stories with their certain types of ceramic arts that particularly speak to them, as well as learning from them as they are so knowledgeable about Japanese pottery and pottery practice in general as well. So this kickoff program, the Wondrous World of Japanese Pottery, is an unstructured, informal fireside among three connoisseurs slash collectors and true enthusiasts of Japanese pottery, and we are going to discuss some of the highlights of the current exhibition, the pinnacles of Japanese ceramic art, taking place at the garden at the moment, while also digging in more personal and kind of professional side of the narrative that this exhibition carries. We are hence joined by today Richard Anson, longtime garden member and volunteer, but also happens to be a dedicated collector of Japanese ceramic art, and someone who's really generous enough to lend us some of his most beloved pieces from his living national treasure collection, personal collection, for this ongoing exhibition. And Robert Yellin, who I was fortunate enough to virtually meet yesterday for the first time, with close to 40 years of experience at the forefront of Japanese pottery, introducing the cream of the crop, right from Kyoto to the rest of the world, is hailing from Kyoto, actually. He's considered to be one of the most prominent Japanese pottery dealers in Japan. Again, I just want to express my, sincerest thanks to, to you, Robert, for taking the time out for this session. This informal talk between the two pottery experts will be moderated by our garden's very own Steve Bloom, Chief Executive Officer of the organization. Steve, over the past 20 years of his professional business with Japan, probably going over there more than, well, close to 100 times by now, right?
98.
He has amassed an impressive personal collection of fine ceramic pieces from Japan as well. Towards the very end of my lengthy kind of intro, just a bit of housekeeping materials here. There will be a brief Q&A session towards the end of the program. The session will be recorded. The entire session, this program will be recorded actually for later sharing with larger audience. The other thing is that all of the questions will come up with your names as well. So it's not going to be anonymous. It's something for you to know ahead of time. So with that, without further ado, I know you guys are really waiting and eager to hear what those three are just about to talk about. And, I guess, Steve, you are warming yourself up so for this very intriguing discussion. So with that, without further ado, do you want to take it away from here?
Sure. Thank you, Aki. Appreciate it. Well, welcome, everyone, and welcome to our panel, to Richard and to Robert, hailing all the way from Kyoto, Japan. Beautiful. He said a beautiful fall morning there. We're at 5 o'clock in the afternoon here. He's at 9 a.m. there. So thank you for getting up in this bright early morning and joining us. Just one correction from what Aki said. He said that perhaps Robert was one of the most prominent ceramics dealers in Japan. I believe he's the most prominent ceramics dealer in Japan. I've known Robert for, gosh, over 10 years, I think. I think we wandered into your gallery with Diane Durston, our former curator of culture, art, and education, who knew you from when she lived in Kyoto, and she made the introduction. And my collecting life changed from that moment on. Because I had Roberts as an insider. And then of course, Richard, we've also known for many years as his work as a volunteer and a docent here at the garden and a member of the garden for many, many years as well. So, great to welcome both of you here. I guess I just want to start out with the basic question to Robert first, to talk about how you got into this world of ceramics there in Japan. Maybe a little bit about what brought you to Japan briefly, but then more importantly, was it ceramics that brought you to Japan, or did you discover ceramics once you arrived in Japan? How did you get into this?
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for setting this webinar up and for the people who are participating. It's a great joy. I grew up in a family where there was lots of Eastern leanings, meditation and philosophy and Zen books. So even in my teen years, things were looking to the East. And so I thought I would come here for a year, and I did. I'm sorry, for a summer program for 3 weeks in college, and that wasn't enough. So I came back for a year. But my interests were always in philosophy and environmental studies and poetry. And once I came to Japan and saw all the dishes on a table, all of those things came together: philosophy, environmental studies, and poetry. So I started to study on my own about what is Bizen and where is it. And so I would walk there, and I did lots of field research in my 20s walking around. And then I started out as a collector, and then I realized that nobody was introducing it to the West. What's happening now? There was lots of historical materials. People knew about Edo period Imari ware and Arita, but they didn't really know much about the stonewares. Of course, the great Louise Court wrote a book on shigaraki, but nobody really paid attention to that unless you were, inside that field of sorts. So I thought it was a shame, just like John Gauntner with sake, nobody was introducing it. So we started writing a column. I started writing a column in the Japan Times, and that really put, a note on who's who now. Who's the main person in Bizen or folks in Bizen, and who's working in shigaraki. I wanted to show more of the native stonewares than the porcelain wares, because as I mentioned, those were already known. And then the internet started, and my father foresightfully said in the 90s, why don't you get a website? And he registered the name JapanesePottery.com, and then everything just opened up. It was a pioneering thing because I really didn't know where the internet was going and if anybody would be confident enough to buy a 3-dimensional piece on a flat screen and expect it to arrive in one piece across the world. But it worked. There were, very few people at first who trusted me, and one of them was Richard. And I'm eternally grateful because it turned out to be a new world for people to explore virtually and acquire pieces. So in a nutshell, that's what it was, from a collector to a writer to, opening up my own gallery.
Well, and I should mention to people that the two of you, while you have worked as collector and gallerist for some years together, today's the first time you've ever actually seen each other this way, right?
It's amazing. Richard, it's true. If Richard had walked in front of me in any place, I would not have known who he was, because it's the first time to see, him. And that's kind of the beauty of the internet in the early days. Of course, now we have Zoom and Skype and all of the FaceTime things, but back then that technology wasn't around. And I have, some loyal clients who I've never met, and they've never been to Japan. And they've, created amazing collections via the internet. So it is our first time.
So let me ask, Robert, because you have the internet sales, but you also have a beautiful gallery there in this beautiful old Japanese Kyoto machiya that's right near the entrance along the road, the entrance to Ginkakuji, one of the most famous temples in Japan. Are you doing most of your sales, typically, not during the pandemic, but typically would you be doing most of your sales from people coming to your gallery or online?
People coming to the gallery.
Okay.
Yeah, during normal times. I've gotten a little lazy of updating my web gallery because it's just me and Chihiro. So
right.
So basically, but now I post one item a day on Instagram. And maybe once a week on my web gallery.
Yeah, I will say you've caught me on Instagram once or twice where I bought those pieces that you right from Instagram. So yeah, so great. So, so Richard, I guess the same question to you as a collector. How did you get into collecting Japanese ceramics? What is it that drew you to it at first and draws you to collecting these things?
Well, I've lived in Japan on 4 different occasions for extended periods of time. And the first time I went there was in 1972 after 2 years in the Peace Corps in Malaysia, where I taught math and physics. And you learn right away when you're in Japan, if you spend any time there, that dishes are handmade. You can go into a department store and outfit a small apartment with these beautiful dishes that are not expensive, and you just use them. And so when I first went, the first time I was in Japan, I was young. It was after the Peace Corps, and I thought, well, I'll live there a year. I'm going to make a lot of money, and then I'm going to go to Europe and be a bum as long as the money lasts, and then I'm going to go home. That was my youthful ideas. And I spent 5 years in Japan. I just got sucked into it. And I lived, and Robert probably knows where this is, in Hashimoto on the Keihansen. It's a local stop, but it's right near the Iwashimizu Hachimangu shrine there. And I used to walk up there all the time and walk around. They had rice fields out there. I'm willing to go on now, yeah. So I was just getting stuff to use in my apartment. And then I went back to Japan a second time to study the language. And then I went a third time on a Fulbright to do research on Japanese religion. And it was at that time that I got affiliated with a very small folklore and history museum in Otaku in Tokyo. And that was a very important place for me to be because there was a Buddhist priest there who was writing history of Ikegami Honmonji, the largest Buddhist temple complex in Tokyo. And so he and I became friends, and he was a serious art collector. And so I used to go over to his temple, and we got to be very good friends. And after I got my doctorate, I couldn't get a job to save my life. I should have written to Robert and asked him for a job.
We need an intern.
I'm your man. But and so I wrote to people. I just said I can't get a job. And so this Buddhist priest friend, he wrote to me and said, well, I'm trying to organize a museum, an art museum, at this complex, and I'm wondering if you'd be interested in coming and help me do this. And if you know anything about Nichiren Buddhism, you know a lot of the most famous names in Japanese art were Nichiren Buddhists, the whole Kano school. In fact, we had a sub-temple where I lived that had most of the Kano graves. Hiroshige, Hokusai, with it. So he and I got to be very close. And when I accepted the job, and he and I used to sit in his temple in the evenings. And he liked old pottery. He didn't like the current pottery. Not to say he didn't like it, but he didn't collect it. And he wanted old things. And he was very good friends with Katsura Matsuburo, who was a Bizen scholar. And so one night we were sitting in his temple and we were talking, and he pulled out something which I have right here, actually. Can you all see this?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so he pulled it out of the box, and he said, "What is it?" I said, "It's Bizen." He said, "When was it made?" I said, "I don't know." And so we talked about it. We spent a lot of time with it, and it's early Edo, so it's about 350 years old. And he just put it back in the box. I mean, the boxes and the wrapping, and there's a whole ritual that goes into this. Well, he didn't put it back properly. He just stuffed it in the box, pushed it across the table, and said, "Here, this is yours.
Wow.
But you have to give it away before you die." And I've always tell people that I think he was trying to teach me about non-attachment. Very important in Buddhism. You know, the idea you can't take it with you, so you got to do something with it.
The materialistic.
And yeah, and that was in 1990, and I spent 4 years there with him, and it was just a real education for me in Japanese art. We had to there he is. Daikoku Summer, or is that?
これは、1610。
Yeah, I didn't think it was Daikoku Summer.
So if I'm not mistaken, Robert, but that's the same similar style piece that I just bought from you off of Instagram, isn't it?
Yeah, this is the brother piece.
Oh yeah, I didn't know there was a brother piece. See,
And a cousin to Richard's piece.
So
it is a true story. We're only stewards. You know, we don't own these pieces. They're wonders to live with and teach us about many aspects of the art of living. So it's a beautiful story, Richard.
yeah, so and then I finally, after that, I had to leave the temple. Unfortunately, things weren't working out. We won't go into that. But I came back to the state. I came back to Portland here because my whole family was here and I didn't have a job and income and stuff. And so I became an adjunct professor at a number of different universities. And I never got paid for organizing a course. They don't, when you're an adjunct, you don't get paid for doing anything really. And but one time they told me that I was going to get paid for organizing, and I was stunned. It's like, I'm going to get money for organizing. I've been doing this for free. Nobody's ever paid. And so I think I had like $500 I was getting for doing this. And I went online and I found Robert's website. He was in Mishima at the time. And you probably don't remember this, but I remember it very well. I bought a Inoue Manji Hakuji with bamboo inscribed in it. I still have that piece. I didn't bring it today, but I still have it. And that was my first splurge piece.
Wow.
I spent over $100 on something. And it was everything that I got for organizing the course. I thought, I've earned this. This is what I want to do with this money. And it was a good feeling. I still have that piece.
Well, isn't that always collecting? It's like, I've earned this. This is something special to me, right? Yeah. It's a treat to yourself, right? Because it's not something you need. It's a nice to have, not a need to have, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So Richard, are you, of course, your collection that we see now is all your sake wares, the tokuris and the guinomis. of the living national treasures of Japan. We'll talk about that in a minute. But are you mainly collector of sake wares, or do you have a more broad collection of tea bowls and vessels and things like that?
No, I primarily focus on shuki, the sake vessels. I do have a few chawan, some yunomi, but that's not a major part of my collection.
Yeah, I think for me, as I started going to Japan, it was just these moments of being in a restaurant and loving what I was eating or drinking out of. And I remember, several times turning to the waitress or the owner of the restaurant and saying, "Do you have these for sale?" And I kept doing that. "Do you have these for sale?" Of course, all the Gaijin asked that. All the foreigners asked that. "Do you have these for sale?" And of course, they're like, "Oh," they're very polite about it. But of course, they're not going to sell you their sake cups, right? So then I, began to look around and realize that actually I could go out and find these and buy these myself. But then I always had the problem because I was going back and forth. I've been to Japan 98 times now. And so finding art that you can purchase that's easy to carry. And so this, is very easy to pack and carry and not get broken. And the larger the vessel, so I would say the majority of my collection is also, sake cups and tokuris. It's been a wonderful thing because they're also, I find them to be representative of every style of ceramics in Japan, from every region of Japan, and all shapes and textures. And so they're truly representative of the field of pottery. Would you say that's true, Robert?
Absolutely. Every potting town or even individual studio potters, I would say 95% all make some type of sake vessel. So yes, it's easy to get a nice wide range of works from different styles, different regions, and you could fit them all in a small cabinet.
Yeah.
You don't need a lot of space.
Well, and as Richard mentioned, they're also more affordable than the large vessels, right? So especially if you're just starting a collection, for anyone out there just starting a collection, the easy, and relatively inexpensive thing to do is start with sake cups.
Yeah, and you don't have to use them for sake. I mean, a lot of people use them. Like this is a beautiful oribe piece by a very popular young artist now, 6th generation, named Yamaguchi Makoto. And it's large enough for tea. You could use it for any beverage you want. So you're not necessarily stuck to a rule of using it only for sake. You can use it for whatever you want. I shouldn't say this, but I have a client on the West Coast, and he was, "Robert, I know chawan tea bowls are very sacred, but is it okay if I have my morning granola in them?" And I said, "Of course, use it as you wish. It's better to use it." And, the Japanese have an expression, "Yo no bi," beauty through using something. So they're meant to be used, and that's where you're going to get the most enjoyment from it. So use it as you see fit in any way.
Yeah. So we were just talking a little earlier before we got into all of this. Richard, you have collected. There's the system of living national treasures, which was created in Japan in 1955 by the Ministry of Culture, and it's a way of recognizing artists in Japan who are at the top of their field, and so they get this designation of living national treasure, and it's given to them while they're still living. And so there are 38 of these ceramic artists in Japan, some who are still living, some who have since died since 1955. But you have gone about and you have collected at least one piece from each of these living national treasures. And what's remarkable about that to me is that, for me, I'm an impulse buyer. I see something in Robert's gallery and I'm like, "That's beautiful, I've got to have it." But it always impresses me when someone is so focused in their collecting and strategic in their collecting. And so I'm just curious about, how, first of all, I'm impressed that you've created this collection, but I'm curious about how did you come about that and deciding, I'm going to get at least one piece from each of these living national treasures.
Well, that's an easy decision to make because they're recognized people, and I have to admit that I'm not crazy about every living national treasure in pottery. I do have pieces by all of them, but some of them there's just one or two, and it's like, okay, I'm done. I've got a representative piece in that. and you know, there's arguments over, and Robert, I'm sure can address this, but there's I'm sure arguments over is this person better than this person in this tradition. You can take Bizen as an example. You know, we've had 5 living national treasures in Bizen. Have they always been the best Bizen potters? Robert and I don't know if we would agree on this, but we might wonder if Mori Togaku isn't up there with the gods somewhere in Bizen. And then
it does get political.
Yeah.
You know, I have a wonderful Mori right here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for those who don't know, Mori Togaku comes from one of the old families of Bizen, dating back centuries. And he's built kilns, which are incredibly large. One took 27 years to make. It's 85 meters long, 6 meters across. It took him 5 years to load the kiln. And on January 4th, 2015, he lit the fire and he fired this kiln for 107 days, maybe a Buddhist thing. He didn't want to go to 108. But anyway, it's true, Richard, it does get political. Not everybody is worthy of it, and not every piece made by Living National Treasure is fantastic. So yeah, I think we are on the same page on that.
I do have a question right now, though, that I think fits in here. As far as I know, Shigaraki and Iga has never had a living national treasure.
Nor has Tamba. You know, there are the 6 ancient kilns. You know, there's never been one for Echizen. There's been one for Tokoname, Yamada Jozan, for his Kyusu tea vessels, Sencha tea vessels.
Yeah.
Bizen's had 5, Shino has had a few, but Iga has had none. And Shigaraki has had none, although some people are designated as city intangible properties or prefectural intangible properties. But no, there's never been a living national treasure for either of those mentioned styles.
So how does somebody get their name on the list? I mean, you don't put your own name on the list clearly, but
it's connections.
Shigaraki Potter that's.
Well,
Yeah.
and I believe there's also been people who have refused the honor, right? Who have said, no, I don't want this title.
That's a rare exception. There's been a few. Rosanjin, Kato, Tokuro are the only 2 that I can recall offhand.
Why Kanjiro?
And Kawaii Kanjiro, thank you.
Yeah.
But there's a Kawaii Kanjiro museum there in Kyoto. If anyone has a chance to go see it, it's a really fascinating museum in a beautiful old house in which he lived. And the kilns are in the back that he used to fire. Oh, look at this. Everyone's got one but me. I'm jealous.
Yeah, it is an exceptional home. If anybody comes, yeah, the calligraphy.
Yeah.
That's
So-
Munakata Shiko. So that's a very rare box signing. He was friends with the woodblock printer.
Yeah.
And the woodblock printer also did the calligraphy and painting. So Richard has a very rare example. For those who are not familiar, Kawaii Kanjiro was part of something called the folkcraft movement, but he was more than a folkcraft potter. And one of his associates or best friends was the woodblock printer, Munakata Shiko. And Richard has an incredible example. I've never seen it before, where usually the box signing is done by the potter himself or herself, but Munakata Shiko did the box signing for Richard's tea bowl. So that makes it even more prized. And you know, the box issue we can talk about another time, but that's a real gem you got there.
Can we actually talk about the box issue? What is it with boxes in Japanese ceramics? It's a big deal, or I should say it's a deal. It affects the value of the piece, if I'm correct. And so why is that? What's the tradition behind that?
Well, I think in the past, traditionally, people, you know, changed their vessels for the seasons. And so it was a storage box for one thing. You know, in the old days, they weren't signed by artists because there were no studio art artists, but it was just a protection thing. And then probably in the 1920s and up, the studio potters started to sign them themselves. And it added value that the person who actually made it thought it was good enough for exhibition or being in a top gallery, so they signed the boxes. And a box does impart value to a work. If you go onto the secondary market, if a piece has a signed original box, it's worth more than the same piece that wouldn't have a box, or the same piece that has a box signed by one of the family members after the potter is deceased. So it's important to get a box. So for example, I just bought a sake cup by A Living Treasure, and the box is authenticated. It says Toyo Saku, Bizen Shuhai, and then his son, his third son, signed it. Now, if his first son signed it, it would be even worth more. But the first son has passed away. So this is the third son who authenticated the piece. Now, if the piece had the original box, it would probably be worth about $1,000 more.
Wow, that's amazing.
Just for the box. The piece is the same.
Right, right. Well, yeah, I think probably some of our listeners out there who are enthusiasts and not as professional collectors, you know, like I am, I'm kind of an amateur collector, can probably relate to, you know, you have a few pieces, and if you don't read Japanese, you take the piece out and you put it on a shelf somewhere. And I now have a basement full of boxes, and I have no idea which box goes with which piece. And so when I leave this great earth, somebody after I'm gone is going to have to figure out which piece goes with which box. And it's a horrible, horrible mess to get yourself into. So I would recommend to everyone that when you take the piece out of the box, that you take a picture of the piece with the box so that it can be identified at a later time. And just a little hint for people.
It's true.
I have a story that'll break your heart, Robert. When I lived in Tokyo, a good friend of mine was a very small antique dealer, and he focused on pottery. And he was a young man at the end of the war. He was in his teens, and his job at that time was he worked for a shipping company, and he would pack up the goods and things that American servicemen were sending back to the US. Well, a lot of them had bought pottery that came in boxes, but the boxes took up more space when they were packing, and so they didn't want the boxes. And so his job was to pack the pottery, wrapping paper around it and stuff, and packing as many as he could into a cardboard box. And then they sold the boxes to the bathhouses so they could burn them to heat up the water.
Yeah.
And he has no idea how many thousands and thousands of dollars of boxes that he helped destroy.
Heat up the cento. Yeah, I've gotten emails from, you know, family members who, you know, their grandparents or uncle were in that situation, and, you know, they're sending photos of pieces they want an appraisal, and there's no box. So those people might have been some of the people that you just described who bought those pieces. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the boxes are important, as we're talking about. It's not just a shoe box where you take your shoes home and then you throw the box away. So do keep the boxes. And I did write something about that. If you go to my information website called e-yakimono.net and type in box, there's some stories about the importance of boxes there. So e-yakimono.net. Maybe Aki can type that into the chat.
So, you know, there are many different ceramics regions in Japan, of course, and these ceramic villages around Japan. And I'm curious from each of you, kind of, you know, Richard, when you were living in Japan, how extensively you've traveled to these different villages in the different regions and the different styles of ceramics in your collecting. And Robert, I know you've been everywhere, but as a gallerist, you know, how often, you know, are you having to travel to these places? You know, what is the buying process for you? Do you go jump in your car and you're driving from village to village, or are artists sending you these pieces from across Japan? How does that work? So maybe we'll start with Richard, just talking about your experience in traveling in Japan, or are you just buying them from galleries where you're not going to the villages?
Yeah, mostly I buy from galleries, people like Robert. They have a way of getting, I think, a lot of the best potteries, especially in the aftermarket. They get pieces coming in for somebody wants to get rid of their collection. They need some money or for other reasons. And they'll approach somebody like Robert, and so he can get things like this. I've spent a lot of time in Kyushu when I was doing research on Japanese religion, and so I've been to the place that claims to be the original Takatoriyaki, for example, and Ontayaki, the little village there, is just so much fun to go to. And I'm a folklorist, and I love watching people work. If I ever went to Japan, if I go back again and COVID is gone, and I'll go to Kyoto, I'll meet Robert, and I'll just say, is there any potter who will just let me sit and watch them work? I'll keep my mouth shut. I won't say a word. I just want to sit and watch them. I used to watch people who made kendo masks. They were friends of mine, and I would go over there every night, brothers, and I would sit with them and watch them do that.
Wow.
One other person, Robert, I'm telling you right now that I want to meet. You know the guy that fixed my Fukami Tokuri? The little lip on it?
Oh yeah,
I thought it was going to be
It's just-
kintsugi, and it came back. It was perfect.
yeah, Takahashi-san. He's living up in Odawara.
I want to meet that guy someday.
Yeah, well, I can arrange it. We can arrange it. Easy, easy, easy.
Does he live in Kyoto?
No, he's up near Odawara, a little past between Mishima and Yokohama.
The guy is an absolute master.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. So, pieces do break, and that's kind of the fragile beauty of it. And I equate that to humans as well. We're fragile, but we're beautiful. But, if a piece does break, you can have it masterfully mended with a gold, either gold or transparent where you wouldn't even know it's been repaired. Mm-hmm. And I had a client who broke, unfortunately, one of his teacups, which he loved to greet every morning. And he was in tears. I could read it in his email. And I said, send it back and we'll have it mended. And he did. And it was a beautiful restoration with gold threads. And we sent it back to him. And he said, I'm going to break all my pieces because this is so much better than I could ever have imagined. But I don't recommend that. Let the piece have its own fate. Don't be breaking your...
Its own art form in and of itself. Right? Kintsugi is
Kintsugi, yeah.
It's its own art form, and they are lovely. They're beautiful. Adds a lovely patina, wabi-sabi to any piece, right?
Yeah, this is just an example.
Yeah. So when I was on sabbatical last year, one of the things that you and I did, Robert, was we went to Shigaraki, and you were able to introduce me to numerous potters and go into several galleries and such. And so talk a little bit about how you build these relationships in these various regions of Japan, and how are you acquire the pieces that how do you find new artists, and how do you build the relationships that you have?
Well, it all started when I was writing my column for the Japan Times, and that was 10 years. So I didn't have my gallery then. I was teaching English privately, at universities and various cultural schools. So I would go to these exhibitions and meet these artists, and then I would write about them. So I already laid the foundation of getting a nice network of connections throughout Japan from my columns. And then I would go visit them and acquire work that way. But now things have changed, of course. There are exhibitions happening still, but I don't write anymore. How I acquire work is artists will come here. And I introduced that on some Instagram feeds. Today, this person visited, and this is what I selected. Another dealer, as Richard said, got some pieces from a private collection the family wanted to deacquisition. So I got them from Koyama Kyoko, a wonderful female potter. Or I'll go visit people. Actually, I'm going to Shigaraki tomorrow. And to visit a potter. And then next week, I'm going to go to the Mino area to visit someone else that I want to go see what they've got to offer. So, and then every other which way you can imagine, there are private dealer auctions here. You need a license. Many of these auctions you have to be introduced to. It's not open to the public, where dealers, deal amongst themselves. So that's a very unique system in Japan. And in Kyoto, there are numerous private dealer auctions, but they're all throughout Japan. I don't really go to those that much because as much as possible, my own philosophy is I want to support the artist directly as much as possible. And if I get a piece from an auction, dealer's auction, it'll only benefit me. It doesn't benefit the potter. So a philosophy that I have, and one of the reasons I don't really offer a lot of antiques, I mean, this is an 800-year-old sake cup from the Kamakura period. It's a beautiful example of the work from back then, but just if I sold that, it doesn't benefit anybody living today. So my goal is to help as much as I can in my own little way, people that I actually know. So I go visit them a lot.
That's great. And, I think that aligns with the philosophy of the Portland Japanese Garden, because we're not a museum. We can't display works of art that are 1,000 years old. So we focus on working with living artists here. And then we're able to bring the artists, we sell their work, it benefits them, it benefits us, and people can meet the artist and watch them do their demonstration and such. So I think it's a wonderful way to work. Absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about collecting and how with the collectors that you work with, Robert, how sophisticated are they? Is it a range of sophistication, and are you advising people on how to view their collections and how to buy pieces? What's the range of collectors that you work with?
Yeah, that's a broad question. I think most people are sophisticated, quirky, smart, intellectual folks, because this is a niche market. People who come to my gallery, because it's not souvenir wear, they're pretty sophisticated people. But I like to sell even, a teacup. If I sell a teacup that brings people joy and happiness every day, or if I sell a large jar that's going to go into a museum, the feeling of sharing is the same. So it doesn't really matter the size or the value of a piece. I don't really advise people how to view or display their work, but I will advise on this piece is better than this piece and for what reasons.
Mm-hmm. So collecting is such a personal thing, isn't it? And it should be a personal thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, if you're buying a Picasso, you're maybe buying that as an investment. But if you're buying, if you're just an average collector, you should buy it because you love it, right? Because it's
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Trust your senses, trust your intuition. You might not be familiar with the style or the artist, but then the piece will start to teach you. You'll go seeking answers to these questions that you have. So absolutely, trust your intuition. Don't buy with your intellect. Buy with your heart.
I don't know about you, Richard, but when I first started collecting, I learned more and more as it's going along around, what ceramics were, and I found that I knew enough about ceramics when everything I liked I couldn't afford anymore, right? So Richard, your family, will you, does your family have the same appreciation for this art form as you do, and how does that inform your collecting? And is this something you do together, or is this really kind of your thing, and they think you're crazy to buy all these pieces, or?
I'm looking past the computer because my wife is sitting over there. You gotta be careful.
Please give my regards to your wife. Thank you, Mrs. Anderson.
No, I'm married. I'm very happily married, and I never had children, and she has 2 children who I consider to be my children. We have 2 grandsons. And so they look at the things and they can say, well, I like this and I don't care for this so much and like that. But there's no really burning desire from any of them. Although I've just learned fairly recently that it's a mistake to show my wife something online that I think she might like. I showed her a Tamura Seito cup and saucer, and she just fell in love with it. And she said, well, I can't afford that. And I said, fine, I just thought you might, because she collects teacups. And by the end of the day, she said, well, you better write to that dealer and until it that I wanted. She got it, but she's not. You know, nobody in my family really has this deep, abiding interest in these things. But that's okay. I mean, I'm not interested in some of the things that they do, so we're just all different, and that's fine.
But you clearly get great enjoyment out of it. I think that
Oh, yeah.
that's the moral of the story here, right? Is if it brings you joy, do it. You know.
Yeah.
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 So, Robert, I want to talk a little bit about today what's happening in the world or in Japan with kind of lineage of Japanese potters, where you might have multiple 10 or 12 generations of potters in one family, and now we're finding that the population of Japan is shrinking, that there are fewer children in each family, and so is there an issue with with this current generation not following in the footsteps of multiple generations, and for those who are following, who decide that they're going to be that next generation in this modern contemporary world that we live in, how are they bringing the art form along, and is that a struggle?
Yeah, it is. All of those things are true because Japan and the world has changed so much. I just wrote an article for an upcoming Kyoto writers in anthology, writers in Kyoto anthology about the Kiyomizu family, and now in the 8th generation, and the son decided to come back and work in the family tradition, and eventually he'll be the 8th generation. Now he's got to, like his ancestors, make works that meet the needs of society today. Tea wares are not as popular as they once were. People are growing up, younger people, with manga and anime. So there's even something now called Manga Pottery, where the potters are painting, are drawing different manga characters in their or on their work. So those are attracting a younger audience. And it's hard. It's hard for a lot of traditional potting families, because with the advent of the internet, with 100 yen shops, with convenience store food, which younger people are buying and not using, traditional dishes, it's hard to keep it going for a lot of these kilns. Bizen, at the top of their game, they had like 600 potters when I first moved here in the 80s. And that's dwindled down to almost half now. Some people have stopped potting and become a toll booth collector on the highway. I actually know that as a fact. So it's hard, and the people who supply potters, like the wood people, nobody wants to follow in those traditions, or the people who made the ash glazes or different supplies that the potters use. There's nobody following in the tradition. Even box makers are having a hard time. So yeah, it's a challenging time for traditional arts in Japan.
I think about our friend here at the garden, Fukami Saharu, who's a Kyoto artist, who does, this is one of his sake cups, this beautiful Celadon porcelain that he's so good at. And he really refined this technique. Yeah, those are his beautiful sculptural pieces there. Just incredible. And for our 50th anniversary, we did the largest at the time, and I think still, was the largest single exhibition of his work in one place in North America. And he, has a daughter, but the daughter is not following in his footsteps, and that's the only child that he has. And he has no apprentices. He's taken no one on to teach. And so this technique that he has perfected, will no longer carry on after he retires. It will just be gone. And I remember being in his studio and watching him throw a few years back. And he said he was really doing a lot of big pieces at the time. And I said, well, is there any reason in particular? He said, well, because I think my back can only do this physically for another couple of years, and then I won't be able to throw these big pieces anymore, and I'll have to only be into small ones. So I'm trying to do as many of the large pieces as I can while I'm able. And so you begin to think about all of the things that impact the styles and the techniques and the lineage of all these ceramics, and And it's a lot to think about, that we're going to lose some of this, and it's inevitable. And he's the perfect example of, we're going to lose the Fukami technique when Fukami, no longer is throwing. So, yeah.
And
So,
he comes
we're
from a
gonna.
traditional.
Yeah,
so he does come from a traditional potting family in Kyoto.
Mm-hmm.
He has
So I want to encourage people to throw some questions our way. We have got about another 10 minutes of the formal one, so start throwing questions if you have them, and towards the end of the talk, we will be doing some Q&A along here. So yeah.
Can I interject here, Steve?
Sure, go ahead, Richard.
I told Robert there's going to be a Natsukashi moment, and we haven't had it yet. So are you ready? You're sitting down? You remember this piece?
Oh yeah, that's in my book. I think, yeah, that's a great Kakurezaki piece. I love that. Yeah, the pleated. It's got the Miyake Issei pleat look to it.
Oh, Miyake Issei. That's funny.
Yeah, that's an early Kakurezaki. Now, Kakurezaki is a legend now. He just turned 70. He's kind of being primed for being the next living national treasure. Yeah, I know. Yeah, if you ever get tired of that one, let me know.
Right. So Richard, are you using these pieces at home? Do you sit for dinner with your wife and pour each other sake out of your tokuris into your sake cups, or how's this? Where are they sitting in boxes waiting for us to put them on exhibition?
Well, they're in boxes, most of them, but and they're downstairs. I have about 550 pieces, but I usually have 2 or 3 pieces on the dining room table, and so I can pick one. But having all of them out somewhere, people have always told me I should have shelves and have them all out on display, and I say no, that's just not the Japanese way, because if I had 100 pieces out, for example, none of them would jump out at you. It just wouldn't. You wouldn't notice them really. You'd just be overwhelmed.
It becomes too much, right?
Yeah.
I have in my office, I have a windowsill that wraps around my office, and we have beautiful views of the garden. But I have these beautiful wide windowsills, and when I first moved into this new office, I thought, well, what could I put here? Because I don't want to block the view. So I ended up bringing my sake cups and putting them around. So what I do is sometimes I'll have my staff in after hours, or we'll have donor parties, and then I'll have an after party in my office, and I'll let everybody pick a sake cup. And I'll say, some of these sake cups are worth thousands of dollars, and some of them are worth $10. I said, but I'm not going to tell you what's what. And people get nervous because they think, oh my God, it's so valuable, and you want, I'm going to use this. And I'm like, but that's what it's for, right? These are meant to drink from and to hold and to be felt and touched and used. And so I encourage everyone to use their wares whenever possible.
There are 2 questions, and if it's okay, I'd like to address them. But absolutely use them. And if you're conscious of using them and you're aware of the moment and you don't let your mind float about, then you'll be fine. They won't break. Yeah. So somebody asked about hagiware, opinions about hagiware. Well, hagiware, is from Yamaguchi Prefecture. It's one of the old tea forms. And there's an expression in Japan, as many of you know, 1 raku, 2 hagi, 3 karatsu for the value of tea bowls. And it's a wonderful soft glaze, sandy clay style. The oldest and most important family is the Miwa family. The 13th generation was just named, his birth name was Kazuhiko, and he became the 13th Kyusetsu. So Kyusetsu is the name given to the head of the family. Richard has a couple of pieces he's holding up right now.
This one is 10, this one is 11.
Yeah. So it's a beautiful soft white glaze. Sometimes it gets to a buff color. You can see the pitted clay body. They've gone into sculptural areas. Actually, I have a Kanita piece here. So, he is an 8th generation artist who took sculptural classes up in Tokyo, and doesn't make, very traditional tea bowls, but very sculptural feel to his work. It's a beautiful style. It's not really suited to use in the humidity in the summer here in Japan, because it soaks in the water or whatever liquid is going to be used, and it will get a lot of mold if it's not properly dried. So that's why in the summer, you don't really use a lot of hagi, but it's a beautiful, beautiful style of pottery. And it's a wonderful town. It's an old castle town. So if you ever get to Japan and you're interested in a pottery town, Hagi is a charming place to visit. And I'm happy to introduce anybody who does go there to some certain kilns. And then somebody asked about, Richard, you can answer this if you look in the chat.
See the question.
Tell us one of your favorite pieces and why. So maybe Richard, do you have a favorite piece there and why?
I'm looking.
Yeah, I know.
It's like picking a favorite child, right?
Yeah, my favorite piece is the one that I got most recent. So
Yeah, there are favorite pieces that I will never own. Robert had two of them actually. He had, as far as I know, you've gotten two tokuri from Mori Togaku's the big kiln that he fired.
yeah, one went to New York and the other's on the table right over there.
You know, I remember I asked you how much they were. And
Yeah, they're ridiculously expensive. I can show it to you if you want. I just have to walk away for 20 seconds.
The other thing on my wish list is an Okabe Minio Celadon, the Beishokuji.
Yeah.
But those cost about as much as the Togaku Tokuri, so.
Yeah, they're very expensive. I mean, sake vessels can run from 500 yen to, you know, for living or past giants to 5-6 million yen, 50,000-60,000 US. So yeah, Okabe Minio is an interesting story about him. If you go online, you can find it. And some more questions. Yo no bi is beauty through use. So Rose asked that. Yo no bi, beauty through using something. And somebody's asking about shino. Well, this is a Nezumi shino teacup, very reddish from the iron in the slip. He carved the foot nicely. Somebody's asking about speak about the foot. There are different signatures of kodai, they call feet. So Maura is asking, hi Maura, Linda. There's different reasons on, this is a Bizen piece by Abe Anjin. You know, you can see the beauty of the clay on a lot of this by just looking at it, but on a glazed piece like this teacup by Kawaii Kanjiro, you can only see the beauty of the clay on the foot, and that's called Tsuchi Aji. So, you know, inevitably when people go to a tea ceremony and they drink tea, they turn the bowl over and they admire the foot, they admire the clay, and you can also tell about the age of a piece because the more something's used, the more patina it will get. So the foot is very important, and it also tells, you know, the depth of the potter because it's like a signature. And it's very difficult to make a tea bowl. People think it's quite easy. You know, I can do that. Well, sure, you can do that. You think you can, but you can't. But to make a really cohesive foot takes years and years of experience.
Great.
We have a few more questions here, and we're running short on time, so we'll just take a couple more questions and then we'll wrap it up. Good pottery town. Well, they're all good, right? It's finding the great artists in those pottery towns, huh? What do you think, Robert?
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the question?
What makes a good pottery town?
Well, you know, for somebody just visiting without much knowledge, I think a town where you can walk around and see a lot. You can not only, you know, walk around and see studios of individual potters, but there are lots of nice galleries, and Bizen is like that. Mm-hmm. But if you go out to like Karatsu, you need a car and you need a guide. So, you know, for a beginning collector or somebody with just a novel interest, a place that you can walk around. Mashiko is like that, north of Tokyo, the famous, you know, town that Hamada Shoji put on the map. So in the first visits, I think a town you can walk around. Tamba is very beautiful. out in the countryside. It's just got a whole street lined with studios and shops.
Yeah, just gorgeous. So another question, are there connections between the different arts? For example, ceramics, pottery, swordsmith, others, and I guess what jumps out to me is, of course, the tea ceremony pulls together so many different art forms in Japan. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, when you talk about tea, yes, there's lots of interconnection, you know, because you'll have the tea master. It's you know, sometimes the tea caddy will have a wooden lid or a bone lid, so somebody else has to make that. I don't think so much interconnection as it was in the past, but there certainly is some when you're working. You know, I have an artist who made a mizusashi, and then he worked with a lacquer artist who made the lacquer lid.
Mm-hmm.
So in the tea world, it's more than most styles or forms of pottery.
So, and just the last question. So someone is asking about, so with wine, of course, there are different shapes and sizes of glasses for different style wine, a red wine versus a white wine versus, and so, you know, these are two sake cups that are very different style and size. So if I were to drink sake out of this versus out of this, would there be any difference in how that's experienced?
Absolutely. You know, a sake cup, like a wine cup, this is a very open-faced one. This is a cylindrical one. The way your mouth tilts back will affect how it goes into your taste buds. This one has a very thin lip, so it'll come right to the forefront of your tongue. You'll get a different sensation than if you drank from, you know, this cylindrical cup, where you have to tip your head back more and it goes back into the back of your tongue, where there are different taste sensations. So absolutely, the form, the thickness, the angle of the lip will change the flavor profile of sake.
Right.
And you don't really want to drink hot sake from this, because the temperature will dissipate so quickly. So this is better for cold sake, you know, where something dark like this is good for, you know, atsukan or nurukan, hot or lukewarm sake. So absolutely, vessels will change the flavor profile and your perception of it. You know, even food on a plate will look much more appetizing than if it's on something plastic, which will change your expectations.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, gentlemen, we're going to wrap it up here today. We've gone for our hour. Richard, I want to thank you, first of all, for loaning us your wonderful collection and for sharing your knowledge and all of that joy that you've collected with all of us. I want to encourage, if you haven't come up to the garden, we have beautiful autumn weather going on right now, but come up and see Richard's collection. It's not going to be up much longer because we have a new exhibition that's coming in at the end of the month. But thank you, Richard, for being here with us today and for loaning us your collection. And to Robert, thank you for imparting your knowledge on us. I want to encourage everyone, if you're going to Kyoto, to go and visit Robert. When we do our tours of Japan, it's always a visit to Robert's gallery. And so you all can come on tour with us or go on your own, but Robert's always there willing and ready to help you find that next beautiful treasure to bring home with you. I have invited Robert to come to Portland. We were working on that just before the pandemic hit and trying to find some dates for him to come. But we're going to get back on that once the planes are flying again and society is open again. So we'll look forward to having you here in person, Robert, sometime very soon, I hope.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all very much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this. Please feel free to reach out to us with feedback on how you thought this went. This, as Aki said, was our first go at this on Zoom, and we want to do a lot more of these because we want to engage with you all. Thank you all very much, and have a good evening. Stay safe and healthy. Take care.